The mop hit the floor with a wet slap that echoed through the corridor of Fort Bragg's Special Operations Command building, but nobody looked up. They never did. The woman pushing the yellow cart moved like a ghost through their world, invisible as morning mist, her presence so unremarkable that conversations continued around her as if she weren't there. But she was listening. She was always listening, and what she heard in these halls could start wars or end them. Maya Chen wore the same faded gray janitor's uniform she'd worn for 3 months, the same scuffed black shoes, the same unremarkable ponytail that kept her dark hair out of her eyes. To every operator, officer, and analyst in the building, she was just part of the furniture. A cleaning lady, background noise, nothing to worry about. They had no idea they were looking at the deadliest woman in the United States military. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Maya Chen didn't look like a warrior. At 5'4", with narrow shoulders and a quiet demeanor, she blended into crowds like water soaking into sand. Her movements were economical, precise, but never sharp enough to draw attention. She carried herself with the kind of careful invisibility that most people mistook for timidity. Her voice, when she spoke at all, was soft and measured, tinged with just enough of an accent to make others assume she was foreign-born military dependents who found work on base doing whatever jobs Americans didn't want. It was the perfect cover. For 3 months, she had pushed that yellow cart through every classified corridor in the building. She had emptied trash cans filled with discarded intel briefings, mopped floors where operators planned their next deployments, and wiped down tables where targeting decisions were made. She moved through their most sensitive spaces like she belonged there, because to them, she was invisible. Maya's real name was Colonel Maya Chen, though no one at Fort Bragg knew it. The janitor's uniform had no rank, no insignia, no hint of the truth. Her ID badge simply read, M. Chen, Maintenance, with a photo that made her look younger and more harmless than she actually was. When soldiers passed her in the hallway, their eyes would slide past her without pause. When officers discussed classified operations, they continued talking as if she couldn't understand English. She understood everything. But Maya wasn't just fluent in English. She spoke Arabic, Pashto, Farsi, Mandarin, and Russian well enough to fool native speakers. She had learned languages the way other people learned to shoot, out of necessity, in places where a misunderstood word could mean death. Her linguistic abilities weren't listed on any public record. Like everything else about her, they were classified at levels most people in the building would never see. The truth was, Maya Chen commanded Delta Force's most classified unit. Officially, she didn't exist. The unit didn't exist. The missions they'd completed over the past 8 years had never happened, at least not according to any paperwork that would ever see daylight. She was what the military called a ghost operator, someone so deep in the black world that even her own government wasn't supposed to know her real identity. But something had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong. 2 weeks ago, her entire 12-man Delta Force team had been compromised during a classified operation in Syria, betrayed, ambushed. 11 of the finest operators she had ever worked with were now dead, their bodies still classified as missing in action, while their families waited for news that would never come. Maya had been the only survivor, the only witness to a betrayal that had originated from inside this very building. Now she was hunting the traitor. Every morning for 3 months, Maya had arrived at Fort Bragg before dawn, checked in with the civilian cleaning contractor that provided her cover identity, and began her systematic surveillance of every person with access to her unit's operational details. She watched their patterns, listened to their conversations, studied their habits. She was looking for the telltale signs of someone living beyond their military salary, someone with unexplained wealth, unusual contacts, or access to information they shouldn't have. The killer could be anyone, a general, a colonel, a staff sergeant with a gambling problem. Maya had learned long ago that treason wore every rank and came in every shape. As she moved through the building's sterile corridors, Maya's trained eyes cataloged details others wouldn't notice. Which officers stayed late and why? Who made phone calls they thought were private, who handled classified materials with less care than protocol required. Her mental database grew larger every day, a detailed map of relationships, vulnerabilities, and opportunities that would eventually lead her to the truth. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her entire career operating in shadows, invisible to enemies and allies alike. Now, she was using those same skills against her own people, hidden in plain sight, while she hunted for the person who had murdered her team. Maya turned a corner into the main briefing corridor, her cartwheels squeaking softly against the polished linoleum. Up ahead, she could hear voices carrying from Conference Room B, animated, confident, distinctly American. She recognized the tones even before she saw the men. It was the weekly intelligence briefing for Special Operations Command, a meeting that brought together some of the most experienced operators and analysts on the base. She slowed her pace, timing her approach to coincide with a natural pause in their conversation. As she drew closer, fragments of their discussion became clearer. They were talking about Syria, about the failed operation that had cost her everything. Maya's grip tightened imperceptibly on the mop handle, but her expression never changed. She continued pushing the cart forward, just another invisible cleaning lady doing her job, while every word they spoke burned itself into her memory. This was why she was here. This was why she had spent 3 months scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. Somewhere in that room was the person responsible for 11 deaths. The person who had sold out her team for money, for ideology, or simply because they could. Maya reached the conference room door and began methodically cleaning the already spotless floor outside, her movements steady and unremarkable. Inside, the discussion continued, unaware that the most dangerous person at Fort Bragg was 3 feet away, listening to every word they said. She had been patient for 3 months. She could be patient a little longer. But patience had limits, and Maya Chen's was running out. The conference room door burst open with more force than necessary, and Colonel Marcus Webb stepped into the hallway like a man who owned everything he surveyed. His boots struck the floor with deliberate authority, the sound echoing off the walls in sharp, measured beats. Webb was the kind of officer who had climbed the ranks through politics as much as competence, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and carrying himself with the swagger of someone who had never been wrong about anything in his life. Behind him came his usual entourage. Major Rick Santos, a compact man with nervous energy and a habit of laughing too loudly at Webb's jokes. Captain Jennifer Hayes, one of the few women to make it into Special Operations Intelligence, though her presence seemed to make Webb uncomfortable. And Staff Sergeant Tommy Clark, a veteran operator whose easy grin masked a razor-sharp tactical mind. They were deep in conversation about operational security, their voices carrying the casual confidence of people discussing classified matters in what they assumed was a secure environment. Maya continued mopping, her movements methodical and unobtrusive, invisible as always. The problem, Webb was saying, his voice pitched to carry authority, is that we're still dealing with insider threats we can't identify. 11 operators dead in Syria, and we still don't know how the enemy knew their exact position. Maya's hand tightened on the mop handle, but she kept her expression neutral, her body language unchanged. Santos nodded vigorously. Could be anyone with access to the operational briefings. Hell, could be a contractor, a maintenance worker, anyone who can get close enough to... His words cut off abruptly as his gaze fell on Maya. For a moment, he simply stared, as if he'd never seen a cleaning person before. Then his expression shifted to something between suspicion and dismissal. Speaking of which, Santos said, his voice loud enough for the entire group to hear. What's she doing here? All eyes turned to Maya. She looked up from her mopping with the carefully practiced expression of someone who didn't understand why she was suddenly the center of attention. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, with just a hint of nervousness that suggested English might not be her first language. Webb followed Santos's gaze, his brow furrowing with annoyance. This is a restricted corridor. Cleaning should be done after hours. Maya straightened slowly, keeping her voice soft and slightly accented. Sorry, sir, I finish soon. No problem. No problem? Webb's voice rose, his irritation sharpening. Do you have any idea what kind of conversations happen in this hallway? Do you understand the word classified? Maya's carefully crafted persona slipped into place like armor. She bobbed her head apologetically, her shoulders hunching slightly. "Yes, sir. I know, listen. Just clean. Very sorry." The broken English, delivered with perfect timing, had exactly the effect she'd intended. Webb's expression shifted from annoyance to the kind of dismissive superiority that came so naturally to men like him. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, loud enough for his team to hear. "Do they do any kind of security screening for these people? She probably doesn't even have a clearance." Santos chuckled, emboldened by his commanding officer's obvious disdain. "I don't think she understands half of what you're saying, sir. Look at her. Probably just happy to have a job that pays better than whatever she was doing back in—" He gestured vaguely at Maya, as if her appearance alone told him everything he needed to know about her background. "Wherever," he finished with a smirk. Captain Hayes shifted uncomfortably, her expression suggesting she didn't appreciate the direction the conversation was taking, but she said nothing. In special operations, questioning a colonel's judgment, even implicitly, could be a career-ending move. Staff Sergeant Clark, meanwhile, watched Maya with a different kind of attention. Something about her posture, the way she held herself even while appearing subservient, nagged at the edges of his consciousness. He'd spent enough time around the world's most dangerous people to recognize that danger didn't always announce itself with broad shoulders and loud voices. But Clark kept his observations to himself. For now. Webb stepped closer to Maya, his voice taking on the patronizing tone that powerful men used when they wanted to emphasize someone else's powerlessness. "Listen carefully," he said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if volume could overcome language barriers. "This building is for military personnel only. Important people have important conversations here. You need to clean somewhere else until we're finished. Understand?" Maya nodded rapidly, her expression appropriately chastened. "Yes, sir, I go. Very sorry." She began gathering her cleaning supplies with what appeared to be nervous haste, playing the role of a flustered immigrant worker who had accidentally stumbled into a place where she didn't belong. The performance was flawless, refined over months of practice, calibrated to trigger exactly the response she was getting. Santos laughed outright. "Sir, I don't think she has the slightest idea what we're talking about. Look at her. Probably thinks we're upset about the way she mops." "Exactly my point," Webb replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone proving a point. "We've got people with no understanding of operational security wandering around our most sensitive areas. It's a miracle we haven't had more breaches." Maya continued her act, carefully wrapping the mop cord and arranging her supplies in the cart with exaggerated care. But inside, every word was being cataloged, analyzed, stored. Webb's casual dismissal of security concerns was interesting. His assumption that threats came from people who looked different, spoke differently, thought differently than him, that was useful information about his blind spots. As she prepared to wheel her cart away, Maya made sure to bump it slightly against the door frame, causing a small bottle of cleaning solution to rattle loudly in its holder. The sound made everyone look at her again, reinforcing their perception of her as clumsy and out of place. "Watch what you're doing," Webb snapped. "This isn't some shopping mall. This is a military installation." Sorry, Maya repeated, her voice higher now, more flustered. She bowed slightly, a gesture that seemed to satisfy Webb's need for deference. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, moving with what appeared to be nervous speed, Maya could hear the conversation resume behind her. Their voices dropped back to normal levels, the casual confidence returning now that the security risk had been removed. But Maya wasn't out of earshot. Not quite. "Need to discuss the Syria operation more carefully," Webb was saying. "If there really is an insider threat, we can't afford to—" His words were cut off as they moved back into the conference room, the heavy door swinging shut behind them with a decisive click. Maya continued down the hallway, her pace steady and unremarkable. To any observer, she was simply a cleaning woman who had been properly put in her place by superior authority. The interaction had played out exactly as she'd expected it would. But in her mind, she was already processing what she'd learned. Webb's reaction to her presence had been predictably arrogant, but there had been something else underneath it. A nervousness that went beyond simple annoyance at a security breach. He'd been too quick to dismiss her, too eager to establish his authority over someone he saw as harmless. Maya had learned long ago that people who worked too hard to appear in control were often the ones with the most to hide. She would be watching Colonel Marcus Webb very carefully from now on. Maya rounded the corner into the building's main operational wing, her cartwheels, tracking silently across the polished floor. The afternoon light filtered through reinforced windows, casting long shadows across a corridor that buzzed with the controlled energy of ongoing missions. This was the heart of Special Operations Command, the place where decisions were made that would ripple across continents. As she moved past a series of briefing rooms, Maya's trained ear picked up fragments of conversation from behind partially closed doors. Reference to ongoing operations in 3 different countries, code names for assets she'd worked with personally, tactical assessments that matched her own first-hand observations from missions that officially had never happened. To everyone around her, she was background noise, but Maya was building a mental map of every operation currently in play, cross-referencing it with intelligence she'd gathered over 3 months of invisible surveillance. Near the end of the corridor, she approached the secure communications center. The door was propped open while technicians ran new cable, and Maya could see banks of encrypted communication equipment through the gap. As she drew closer, she noticed something that made her slow her pace almost imperceptibly. One of the satellite communication terminals was configured incorrectly. The encryption protocol was set to an outdated standard that had been compromised by foreign intelligence services 8 months ago. Any messages sent through that terminal would be readable by at least 3 different enemy intelligence agencies. Maya's mind immediately cataloged the implications. Someone with access to this facility was either dangerously incompetent or deliberately compromising U.S. communications. Given what had happened to her team in Syria, she suspected the latter. A young specialist emerged from the communications room carrying a toolkit, his face flushed with frustration. Specialist Andrew Kim was new to Fort Bragg. Maya had been tracking his routine for 2 weeks, and his body language suggested he was dealing with a problem beyond his expertise. "Excuse me, miss," Kim called out as Maya approached. "Do you speak English?" Maya looked up with the same uncertain expression she'd perfected over months of practice. "Little bit," she said carefully. "What you need?" Kim glanced around, clearly hoping someone more qualified would appear. When no one did, he gestured helplessly toward the communications room. "I've got a satellite terminal that won't sync with the encryption server. My supervisor's in a meeting, and I'm supposed to have this fixed in the next 10 minutes or I'm looking at an ass chewing that'll make my ears bleed." Maya tilted her head, appearing to process his words slowly. "Machine broken?" "Yeah, the machine is broken," Kim said, his frustration overriding any concerns about discussing technical problems with a civilian contractor. "The encryption handshake keeps failing, and I can't figure out why. I've reset it 6 times, checked all the cable connections, run every diagnostic I know." Maya moved closer to the door, ostensibly to continue her cleaning, but actually to get a clear view of the terminal configuration. Her eyes swept across the equipment with the kind of systematic precision that came from years of working with communication systems in hostile environments. The problem was immediately obvious to her. The terminal's firmware had been rolled back to a version from 18 months ago, creating a compatibility issue with current encryption protocols. It was exactly the kind of mistake that could be made by someone who wanted to ensure communications were interceptable by enemy intelligence services. For a moment, Maya considered her options. Revealing technical knowledge would be inconsistent with her cover identity, but Kim was clearly desperate, and his supervisor would eventually notice the problem anyway. "Maybe," Maya said slowly, as if the words were difficult for her. "Maybe I see similar problem before." Kim's eyebrows rose. "You've worked with satellite communications?" Maya nodded carefully. "My husband, he worked with computers. Sometimes I help, maybe I look." It was a plausible enough explanation for someone in her position to have picked up basic technical knowledge. Kim hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing military protocol against his immediate need for help. Desperation won. "Okay," he said, stepping aside. "But don't touch anything unless I tell you to, all right? This stuff is way above both our pay grades." Maya moved into the communications room, her expression maintaining the careful uncertainty of someone out of her depth. but her eyes immediately went to the terminal's configuration screen, reading the technical data with the fluency of someone who had configured similar systems under enemy fire. "This number," she said, pointing to the firmware version display, "is not same as other machines, yes?" Kim leaned over to look where she was pointing. His face went through a series of expressions as he processed what she'd noticed. "Son of a bitch," he breathed. "The firmware version is rolled back to 1.7.2. Everything else in here is running 2.1.4. He looked at Maya with newfound respect. "How did you spot that so quickly?" Maya shrugged, maintaining her carefully constructed persona. "Numbers not match. Same like when my husband fixed computer at home." Kim was already pulling up the firmware update interface, his fingers flying across the keyboard with renewed confidence. "Jesus, I've been chasing cable problems for 2 hours when it was just a version mismatch. My supervisor would have spotted this in 30 seconds if he'd been here." As Kim worked to update the terminal firmware, Maya continued her cleaning routine, but her mind was racing. The rolled-back firmware wasn't an accident. Someone with administrative access to these systems had deliberately created a vulnerability. The question was whether it had been done to facilitate intelligence gathering or to enable the kind of targeting data that had gotten her team killed in Syria. "Hey," Kim said, interrupting her thoughts. "I don't know how you learned to spot that, but you just saved my career. When this thing comes back online, my supervisor is going to think I'm some kind of technical wizard." Maya smiled with what appeared to be simple pleasure at helping someone. "Is good. I am happy to help." But as Kim ran final diagnostics on the repaired terminal, Maya was thinking about timing. The firmware had been rolled back exactly 6 days before her team's mission in Syria. Someone had been preparing the communications infrastructure to be compromised, ensuring that operational details could be intercepted by enemy forces. She was getting close to finding her traitor. As Maya pushed her cart out of the communications center, she passed Staff Sergeant Clark in the hallway. He was walking toward the briefing rooms, but his pace slowed as he noticed her emerging from the secure area. "Everything all right in there?" Clark asked Kim, who was packing up his toolkit with obvious relief. "Yeah, just a configuration issue," Kim replied. Actually, the cleaning lady spotted the problem. Sharp eye for someone who doesn't speak much English. Clark's gaze shifted to Maya, who was already moving down the hallway with her characteristic unobtrusive efficiency. Something about Kim's comment triggered a memory, a conversation he'd had years ago with a Delta Force operator who'd learned to speak broken English as part of his cover identity in Afghanistan. "The best disguises," the operator had told him, "are the ones that make people underestimate everything about you. Language, intelligence, capability. When they think you're harmless, they stop paying attention. And that's when you learn everything you need to know." Clark watched Maya disappear around the corner, her yellow cart squeaking softly against the polished floor. For the first time since she'd started working in the building, someone was wondering if there might be more to the quiet cleaning woman than met the eye. But Clark kept his suspicions to himself. In his experience, the most dangerous people were often the ones nobody suspected. The alarm that shattered the afternoon quiet at Fort Bragg wasn't the routine drill signal that echoed across the base twice a week. This was the sharp, urgent wail that meant real danger, the kind that made experienced operators drop whatever they were doing and move toward predetermined rally points with the fluid efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire careers. Maya was mopping the floor outside the intelligence briefing room when the first blast of sound cut through the building. Her body reacted before her mind had fully processed what she was hearing, muscles tensing, weight shifting to the balls of her feet, head turning automatically toward the sound's origin. For half a heartbeat, her carefully constructed persona slipped, and anyone watching would have seen the unmistakable alertness of a combat veteran responding to a threat. But no one was watching. The hallway had emptied in seconds as military personnel rushed toward their assigned positions, leaving Maya alone with her mop and cart and the growing certainty that whatever was happening wasn't a drill. The building's PA system crackled to life with the voice of the base commander, Colonel James Mitchell, his words clipped and urgent. "This is not a drill. We have multiple security breaches at the main gate and potential hostile forces on base. All personnel implement threat condition Delta immediately. This is not a drill." Maya abandoned her cleaning supplies without a second thought. 3 months of invisible surveillance had given her an intimate knowledge of Fort Bragg's security protocols, and she knew exactly what threat condition Delta meant. The base was under attack, and every person inside these walls was potentially in lethal danger. Moving with the silent efficiency that had kept her alive through 8 years of classified operations, Maya made her way toward the building's security office. If hostile forces had breached the perimeter, the first place they would target was the communications and command infrastructure housed in this building. And if her investigation into her team's betrayal had taught her anything, it was that threats could come from inside as well as outside. As she approached the security office, Maya could hear voices raised in controlled urgency. Through the partially open door, she saw Colonel Webb standing over a bank of monitors, showing feeds from security cameras positioned around the base perimeter. His face was flushed, his movements sharp with tension, but there was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like anticipation. "How many vehicles breached the main gate?" Webb was asking Staff Sergeant Clark, who was coordinating with base security from a communication console. "3 confirmed," Clark replied, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Military-style trucks, but no identifying markings. They're moving toward the command building." Maya positioned herself just outside the doorway, close enough to hear but hidden from view. Her mind was already processing tactical scenarios, calculating response times, evaluating defensive positions. The attack pattern was wrong for a random terrorist assault, too coordinated, too focused on specific targets. This felt personal. "Sir," Clark continued, "we've got teams responding, but they're requesting backup. These aren't amateur insurgents. They're moving like they know our defensive positions." Webb's jaw tightened. "How could they know our positions?" "Same way they knew exactly where to find Delta Force Team 9 in Syria," Maya thought, but she kept the observation to herself. Captain Hayes burst into the security office, her face pale with urgency. "Sir, we've lost communication with 2 of our perimeter checkpoints, and there's something else. We're getting reports of coordinated cyber attacks on our network infrastructure. Someone's trying to bring down our entire command and control system." Maya's blood ran cold. A simultaneous physical and cyber assault targeted at Fort Bragg's most sensitive operations center, coordinated with knowledge of internal security procedures. This wasn't just an attack. It was a precision strike designed to cripple Special Operations Command's ability to respond to global threats, and it was happening exactly 3 months and 2 days after her team had been killed in Syria. "Jesus," Webb muttered, running a hand through his silver hair. "We need to evacuate the classified materials from this building. If they breach the perimeter—" He was cut off by the sound of automatic gunfire echoing from somewhere outside the building. Close, too close. Major Santos came running down the hallway, his face grim. "Sir, they've reached the outer security cordon. We've got multiple casualties, and our response teams are pinned down. Whatever training these hostiles have, it's military grade." Maya felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest, the calm that always descended when death was close and decisions had to be made quickly. She had experienced this feeling in a dozen different countries, in situations where the margin between success and failure was measured in heartbeats and inches. Through the security office window, she could see muzzle flashes in the distance, small, bright flowers of light that marked where American soldiers were fighting for their lives against an enemy that had somehow penetrated one of the most secure military installations in the United States. Her team was dead. Her cover was blown. But there were good people in this building who needed to survive the next hour, and Maya Chen had never walked away from a fight when lives were at stake. Webb was barking orders into his radio, trying to coordinate a defense with units that were scattered across the base, but his commands were disjointed, reactive rather than strategic. He was thinking like a staff officer, not like someone who had commanded troops in actual combat. Maya had commanded troops in combat. More importantly, she had trained for exactly this scenario, defending fixed positions against superior numbers with knowledge of internal security weaknesses. She stepped into the security office. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. The broken English accent was gone, replaced by the crisp diction of someone accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. Every head in the room turned toward her. For a moment, nobody spoke. "Who the hell are you?" Webb demanded, his face flushing with anger and confusion. "Civilians need to evacuate immediately." "I'm not a civilian," Maya interrupted, her tone carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people listen despite themselves. "And you're about to lose this building if you don't adjust your defensive strategy." Santos stared at her as if she'd materialized from thin air. "Lady, I don't know what you think you're doing, but—" Maya cut him off by walking directly to the security monitors and pointing at the enemy positions visible on the camera feeds. 3-vehicle assault team, approximately 12 to 15 personnel, she said, her voice precise and analytical. They've positioned themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that pin down your response teams, while a separate element moves to breach the building. Classic special operations tactical formation. She turned to face Webb directly. They know your defensive protocols because someone told them. This isn't a random attack. It's a targeted strike designed to eliminate witnesses to a classified operation that went wrong 3 months ago. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of gunfire and the electronic beeping of communication equipment. Clark was the first to speak. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "who exactly are you?" Maya looked around the room, measuring each face, calculating how much truth they could handle and how much time they had left. "Someone who's seen this exact tactical formation before," she said, "in Syria, right before 11 Delta Force operators were killed in an ambush that someone in this building made possible." Webb's face went white. Hayes took a sharp breath. Santos's mouth fell open. "Now," Maya continued, her voice hardening with command authority, "do you want to argue about who I am, or do you want to save the lives of the soldiers currently dying outside this building?" The security office erupted into controlled chaos as Maya's words sank in. Colonel Webb stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "You're a cleaning woman. You can't possibly—" "Contact Hawk 7, Maya interrupted, pointing at Clark. "Tell them to fall back from the north perimeter and establish overwatch positions on the communications building roof. Their current position leaves them exposed to enfilading fire from the parking structure." Clark hesitated, looking between Maya and Webb. The radio in his hand crackled with urgent requests for orders. "Hawk 7, this is command," came the voice from the radio, tight with stress. "We need immediate tactical guidance. We're taking heavy fire and can't hold this position much longer." Maya stepped closer to Clark, her voice dropping to the tone she'd used to command her Delta Force team through firefights across 3 different continents. "Tell them now," she said, "or watch good soldiers die because you're worried about protocol." Something in her voice, the absolute certainty, the weight of command, cut through Clark's hesitation. He keyed the radio. "Hawk 7, command, fall back to the communications building and establish overwatch positions on the roof. Watch your 6 for enfilading fire from the parking structure." "Copy, command," came the immediate response. "Moving now." Through the security monitors, they could see soldiers breaking contact and moving toward the positions Maya had indicated. Within seconds, the tactical situation began to shift. The soldiers reached their new positions and immediately began suppressing enemy fire with precision that suggested they finally had a clear view of their targets. Captain Hayes was staring at Maya with wide eyes. "How did you know they were exposed to crossfire from the parking structure?" "Because whoever planned this attack has detailed knowledge of Fort Bragg's defensive positions," Maya replied, her attention focused on the monitor feeds. "They know exactly where your people will set up, and they've positioned themselves to exploit those predictable defensive choices." She pointed to another monitor. "There, vehicle number 2. It's not engaging your response teams. It's moving toward the building's service entrance. They're going to breach while your defenders are focused on the firefight outside." Webb shook his head violently. "This is impossible. You can't know any of this. You're a contractor. You don't have access to—" "Sir," Santos interrupted, his voice strained. "She's right about the service entrance. I can see movement on camera 4. Maya was already moving toward the door. "You have maybe 2 minutes before they breach the building. Are your classified materials secure?" The safe room protocols were activated when the alarm sounded, Hayes said automatically. But the personnel inside, if the building is breached, won't survive if the attackers reach them, Maya finished. Where's the safe room? Webb's face had gone from flushed to pale. Sub-level B, behind the intelligence archive. But civilian contractors don't have access? Maya turned to face him directly, and for the first time since the attack began, her carefully maintained cover completely fell away. Webb found himself looking into the eyes of someone who had killed people professionally, someone who had commanded soldiers in places where mistakes meant death, someone who was measuring him for threats and finding him wanting. "I'm not a contractor," Maya said quietly. "I'm the person who's been investigating your security breaches for the past 3 months. And right now, I'm the only person in this room who's actually commanded troops in combat. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Santos was the first to recover, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm. "Investigation?" he said. "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that identified how classified operational details about Delta Force Team 9 found their way to Syrian intelligence services," Maya replied. "The kind that tracked financial irregularities in accounts belonging to senior officers with access to targeting data." Webb's face had gone completely white. "You're talking about classified?" "I'm talking about 11 dead operators and a leak that originates from inside this building," Maya cut him off. "A leak that I've spent 3 months tracking while pretending to mop your floors and empty your trash cans." Clark lowered his radio slowly. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "what's your actual clearance level?" Maya met his eyes steadily. "Higher than anyone in this room." Before anyone could respond, the building's lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing the security office in red emergency illumination that made everyone look like they were covered in blood. "They've cut the primary power," Maya said calmly, "which means they're about to breach. How many personnel are in the safe room?" Hayes checked her tablet with shaking hands. 14. Intelligence analysts, communication specialists, and 3 officers. "Are any of them armed?" "Standard sidearms only," Maya nodded grimly. "Against a professional assault team, that won't be enough." Santos found his voice. "Even if we believe you, and I'm not saying we do, what exactly are you proposing?" Maya's response was interrupted by the sharp crack of explosives echoing through the building, close enough to feel the vibration through the floor. "I'm proposing," she said, moving toward the security office's weapons locker, "that someone with actual combat experience take command of this situation before everyone in this building ends up like my team in Syria." Webb stepped between her and the weapons locker. "You're not authorized to access—" Maya looked at him with the kind of patience people reserved for children who didn't understand that the house was on fire. "Colonel," she said softly, "your base is under attack by professionals who know your security protocols, your defensive positions, and your personnel assignments. They've killed multiple soldiers already, and they're currently moving through your building toward a room full of people who can't defend themselves." Another explosion, closer this time, the sound of boots in the hallway outside. "So you can either continue worrying about my authorization," Maya continued, "or you can get out of my way and let me do what I was trained to do." Clark made the decision for everyone. He stepped to the weapons locker and began entering the access code. "Ma'am," he said formally, "what do you need?" Maya's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked the M4 carbine Clark had handed her, her movements precise and automatic, the muscle memory of someone who had performed these same actions in hostile territory more times than she could count. The weapon settled into her grip like it belonged there, an extension of her will rather than a foreign object. Webb watched in stunned silence as the woman who had been mopping his floors 20 minutes ago conducted a tactical inspection of the rifle with the fluid competence of a seasoned operator. She checked the chamber, tested the action, verified the sight alignment, and loaded a fresh magazine in less than 10 seconds. "Ma'am," Clark said quietly, "I need to know who I'm taking orders from." Maya looked up from the weapon, her eyes meeting his with steady certainty. Colonel Maya Chen, United States Army Special Operations Command, operational call sign, Ghost. The words hit the security office like a physical blow. Santos took an involuntary step backward. Hayes's tablet slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Webb's mouth opened and closed silently. Clark's expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching awe. Ghost, he repeated slowly. The ghost who commanded the Kandahar rescue operation? The one who brought out an entire Afghan government delegation under siege? Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That operation is classified. So is the fact that Ghost was supposedly killed in action 3 months ago in Syria, Clark replied, along with the rest of Delta Force Team 9. Another explosion echoed through the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons fire from somewhere inside the structure. Maya's attention snapped back to the tactical situation. 11 members of my team were killed, she said, slinging the M4 across her chest. I survived because I was providing overwatch from an elevated position when the ambush began. The enemy knew our exact position, our approach route, and our extraction timeline. She moved to the security monitors, studying the feeds with tactical intensity. They had that information because someone in this building sold it to them. Webb finally found his voice. This is impossible. Ghost is a legend. Ghost is a person, Maya interrupted. A person who's been hunting the traitor responsible for 11 deaths while everyone in this building dismissed her as a cleaning woman who barely speaks English. Santos was staring at her with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just shifted. The broken English, the submissive behavior. It was all an act? Cover identity, Maya confirmed, designed to make me invisible to people who assume competence correlates with rank insignia and accent reduction. Captain Hayes had recovered enough to speak. Ma'am, if you're really Colonel Chen, you can prove it. Ghost's operational history includes details that aren't in any public record. Maya turned to face her, and for a moment, the weight of classified operations and sacrifices nobody would ever know about flickered across her expression. Operation Silent Thunder, she said quietly. Kabul, 18 months ago, 3-man. Extraction team. We were supposed to extract a CIA asset from a compromised safe house. Instead, we found 17 Afghan interpreters and their families trapped in a building surrounded by Taliban fighters. Hayes's eyes widened. She had read the classified after-action report. Maya continued, her voice steady but heavy with memory. I made the call to abort the primary mission and extract all 17 families instead. Took us 14 hours, 3 separate firefights, and cost us our extraction helicopter. But we got them out. That operation saved 68 lives, Hayes whispered, including 12 children. It also violated direct orders, Maya replied. Some people consider it my greatest success. Others consider it evidence of poor judgment and insubordination. Clark was watching her with growing respect. Ma'am, that's the kind of decision only Ghost would make. Anyone else would have followed orders and left those families to die. Before Maya could respond, the security office door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and smoke. 3 figures in tactical gear burst through the opening, their weapons trained on the people inside. Maya moved before anyone else could react. She rolled left behind the security console, the M4 coming up in a fluid motion that spoke of countless hours of close-quarters combat training. Her first shot took the lead attacker center mass, dropping him instantly. Her second shot caught the man behind him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the floor. The third attacker managed to get off a burst of automatic fire that shattered monitors and sent everyone diving for cover. But Maya was already moving, flanking left, while his attention was focused on the others. She put 2 rounds center mass from a position he never saw coming. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 seconds. In the sudden silence that followed, Maya rose from her firing position, weapons still ready, eyes scanning for additional threats. Smoke drifted from the destroyed doorway, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Clear, she announced, her voice calm and professional. Webb stared at her from behind an overturned desk, his face pale with shock. Jesus Christ, he breathed. You just neutralized 3 hostile combatants who were about to kill everyone in this room, Maya finished matter-of-factly. She was already moving toward the fallen attackers, checking them for intelligence while maintaining situational awareness. Santos emerged from cover, his service pistol drawn but unnecessary. "Ma'am, where did you learn to shoot like that?" Maya looked up from searching the attackers. "The same place I learned that these men are carrying Russian-manufactured weapons with Syrian military markings. The same place I learned to recognize the tactical formation they used to breach this building." She pulled a radio from one of the attackers and handed it to Clark. "Monitor their communications. I need to know how many more are in the building and where they're positioned." As Clark began working with the captured radio, Maya turned her attention to the security monitors that were still functioning. The tactical picture was clearer now. The outside attack had been a diversion, designed to draw defenders away from the building while the real assault team penetrated the interior. "They're going for the safe room," she said, studying the camera feeds. "Same pattern as Syria. Create chaos, eliminate witnesses, extract with classified materials." Hayes looked at her with something approaching reverence. "Ma'am, how many operations like this have you commanded?" Maya's expression remained focused on the tactical situation. "Classified." But Clark, who was listening to the enemy communications, looked up with grim understanding. "Ma'am, they're asking for ghost confirmation. They know you're here." Maya felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. The attack on Fort Bragg wasn't random. It wasn't even primarily about stealing classified materials. It was about finishing what had started in Syria. Someone wanted Colonel Maya Chen dead, and they were willing to attack a United States military installation to make it happen. "How many are left in the building?" she asked. Clark held up the radio. "4 more, moving toward sublevel B. They're asking about primary target confirmation." Maya checked her ammunition and moved toward the destroyed doorway. "Then it's time to give them what they're looking for." Webb called after her. "Colonel, you can't face 4 attackers alone." Maya paused at the threshold, looking back at him with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived operations that existed only in classified files. "I'm not alone," she said. "I'm Ghost." Maya moved through the damaged corridors of Fort Bragg's Special Operations Command building with the fluid silence of a predator. The emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red shadows, and the acrid smell of explosives hung in the air like a reminder of how quickly order could collapse into chaos. She had left Webb, Santos, Hayes, and Clark in the security office with instructions to coordinate with the base defense teams and ensure no additional hostiles entered the building. Now she was hunting the 4 remaining attackers who were moving toward the safe room and toward the 14 intelligence personnel who had no idea their lives depended on a woman most of them had never noticed. Maya's tactical assessment was grimly simple. 4 professional operators with superior positioning, intimate knowledge of the building's layout, and the element of surprise. Against 1 woman with a rifle, limited ammunition, and the weight of 11 dead teammates driving her forward. She liked those odds. As Maya approached the stairwell leading to sublevel B, she heard voices echoing from below. Not English, Arabic, spoken with the dialectical precision that marked men who had learned military terminology in Syrian training camps. She recognized the cadence, the specific terms they used for tactical positioning. These were the same voices she'd heard on intercepted communications 3 months ago, right before her team walked into an ambush that should have killed her too. Maya descended the stairs with practiced silence, her weapon ready, every sense focused on the hunt. At the sublevel landing, she paused to listen. The voices were closer now, coming from the corridor that led to the intelligence archive and the safe room beyond it. "Target confirmed on upper level. Eliminate all witnesses after extraction. Ghost priority 1. Maya's jaw tightened. They weren't here just to steal classified materials. This was a cleanup operation, designed to eliminate everyone who might have knowledge about the Syrian betrayal, including her. She rounded the corner into the archive corridor and immediately assessed the tactical situation. 2 attackers were positioned at the far end, working to breach the safe room's reinforced door. The other 2 were providing security, positioned to cover approaches from both directions. They had chosen their positions well. Too well. Maya pulled back behind the corner and keyed the radio she'd taken from one of the dead attackers. Speaking in flawless Arabic, she transmitted a simple message. "Ghost is down. Repeat, Primary target eliminated. The response was immediate and exactly what she'd expected. Confirm visual. Require body verification. Negative visual, Maya replied. Target eliminated during building assault. Body and security office, upper level. She waited, counting heartbeats, calculating how long it would take trained operators to process new information and adjust their tactical plan. 20 seconds later, she heard rapid footsteps on the stairs behind her, 2 of the 4 attackers moving back toward the upper level to verify her death. Now the odds were even. Maya swung around the corner with the M4 at ready position. The remaining 2 attackers were still focused on the safe room door, their attention divided between the breach operation and watching for threats from the corridor they expected her to approach from. They weren't watching for a threat that had already eliminated half their team and was now behind them. Maya's first shot caught the man working on the door center mass, dropping him instantly. Her second shot took his partner in the chest as he turned toward the sound, sending him spinning into the wall where he collapsed without firing a shot. The corridor fell silent, except for the electronic beeping of the safe room security system. Maya approached the fallen attackers with tactical caution, weapon ready, checking for signs of life and additional threats. Both men were down permanently, their weapons useless beside them. She was examining their equipment when she heard the safe room door's locks disengaging. The heavy, steel panel swung open, revealing 14 faces staring out at her with expressions ranging from terror to confusion. "Ma'am," called Master Sergeant James Rodriguez, the senior non-commissioned officer among the trapped personnel. What's your status? We heard gunfire." "The immediate threat has been neutralized," Maya replied, her voice carrying the calm authority of command. "But we have 2 more hostiles in the building. I need you to maintain security in the safe room until the all-clear is given." Rodriguez stepped halfway out of the safe room, studying Maya with the experienced eye of a 20-year veteran. Something about her bearing, her weapon handling, her calm competence in the middle of a crisis triggered recognition. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "what's your unit?" Before Maya could answer, the sound of boots on the stairwell echoed through the corridor. The 2 attackers who had gone to verify her death were returning, and they would be much more cautious now that they knew they'd been deceived. Maya turned to Rodriguez with the kind of direct command presence that transcended rank insignia. "Get everyone back in the safe room and seal it. Do not open that door for anyone except base security with proper authentication codes." "Ma'am, what about you?" Maya checked her ammunition, 1 magazine remaining, maybe 15 rounds, against 2 experienced operators who now knew she was alive and hunting them. "I'll be fine," she said with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked into worse situations and walked out again. Rodriguez hesitated. Something about this woman, her tactical movement, her weapon skills, her absolute calm under fire, reminded him of the legendary operators he'd served with in the most classified units of the U.S. military. But before he could ask more questions, Maya was already moving toward the stairwell, disappearing into the red-lit corridor like a ghost returning to the shadows. The final 2 attackers were more cautious than their colleagues had been. Maya could hear them communicating in whispers as they descended the stairs, their movements slow and deliberate. They knew she was still alive, knew she had eliminated 4 of their team, and knew that their mission had gone from routine cleanup to a fight against someone with superior tactical skills. Maya positioned herself in an alcove where the main corridor intersected with the archive access tunnel, a position that gave her sight lines in multiple directions while providing cover from direct assault. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and prepared for the kind of close-quarters engagement that separated elite operators from everyone else. The first attacker appeared at the corner 15 feet away, moving in a tactical crouch with his weapon ready. Maya waited until he had committed to the movement, then fired twice. Center mass, textbook precision, he dropped without a sound. His partner reacted instantly, spraying. Automatic fire down the corridor while moving to a covered position. Bullets sparked off concrete walls and shattered ceiling tiles, filling the air with debris and the sharp crack of ricochets. Maya remained in cover, calculating angles and timing. The last attacker was good, disciplined, patient, professional, but Maya had been fighting men like him since before some of them were old enough to hold a rifle. She pulled a flashbang grenade from her tactical vest, standard equipment she'd taken from the security office, and prepared it for deployment. The confined space of the corridor would amplify the effect, giving her a brief window to end the engagement. "Ghost," called a voice from the attacker's position. English now, accented but clear. "We know who you are. We know what happened in Syria. Surrender now, and we will make your death quick." Maya's response was to pull the pin and count down. 3, 2, 1. The flashbang detonated with overwhelming force, the sound and light designed to disorient and disable anyone within a 30-foot radius. Maya moved immediately, rounding the corner while the attacker was still stunned, and found him stumbling blindly with his hands over his ears. She put 2 rounds center mass, ending the threat and the attack. The corridor fell into complete silence. Maya stood among the bodies of men who had traveled halfway around the world to kill her, men who had been sent by someone who thought a cleaning woman would be an easy target. They had been wrong. Maya was checking the final attacker when she heard voices approaching from the stairwell. American voices, calling out proper challenge and response codes. The base's security forces had finally cleared the upper levels and were moving to secure the building. "Down here," Maya called out, her weapon lowered but ready. "Sub-level B, all threats neutralized." The first person to appear at the bottom of the stairs was Staff Sergeant Clark, followed by a full squad of base security personnel. Clark's eyes swept the corridor, taking in the tactical aftermath, 4 bodies positioned exactly where someone with superior marksmanship and tactical positioning would have placed them. "Ma'am," Clark said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there 6 hours ago. "The building is secure. All external threats have been eliminated." Maya nodded, finally allowing herself to relax slightly. "Casualties?" 3 base personnel wounded, none fatal. The attackers lost their entire assault team. Clark paused, studying her. "Ma'am, how many hostiles did you neutralize?" 7 total, Maya replied matter-of-factly. 3 in the security office, 4 down here. One of the security team members, a young corporal, stared at her with undisguised amazement. "Ma'am, you eliminated 7 trained fighters by yourself?" Maya looked at him with the kind of patient expression reserved for people who had never been in actual combat. "That's what I was trained to do." As the security team began processing the scene, Maya heard more footsteps on the stairs. This time, it was Colonel Webb, accompanied by Santos, Hayes, and what appeared to be half the base's senior staff. Word had apparently spread quickly about the events in the building. Webb descended the stairs slowly, his face pale with shock and something that might have been shame. When he reached the bottom and saw the tactical aftermath of Maya's engagement with the attackers, he stopped walking entirely. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, "you really are Ghost." Maya turned to face him, and for the first time since the attack began, allowed some of the weight of the past 3 months to show in her expression. "I tried to tell you," she said quietly, "but you were too busy making assumptions about who I was based on how I looked and how I spoke." Webb's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Around him, the assembled officers and senior staff were studying Maya with expressions that ranged from awe to embarrassment to profound respect. Master Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the safe room, leading the 14 personnel who had been trapped inside. When he saw Maya standing in the corridor surrounded by neutralized threats, his face went through a series of expressions before settling on something approaching reverence. "Ma'am," he said formally, "I need to know who I'm addressing." Maya straightened to her full height, and for the first time in 3 months, allowed her true identity to show completely. "Colonel Maya Chen," she said clearly, "United States Army Special Operations Command, call sign Ghost." The effect was immediate and electric. Rodriguez's eyes widened with recognition. Several of the intelligence analysts stepped back involuntarily. The security team members looked at each other with expressions that suggested they were suddenly aware they were in the presence of living legend. And then, without any prompting or command, Master Sergeant Rodriguez came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying deep respect, "it is an honor." The salute that Master Sergeant Rodriguez gave Maya Chen cut through the red-lit corridor like a blade through silence. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, no one moved. The sound of his boots snapping together echoed off concrete walls, sharp and definitive as a declaration of truth. Then, As if Rodriguez's recognition had broken a dam that had been holding back a flood, realization began spreading through the assembled personnel like wildfire. "Ghost," whispered one of the intelligence analysts who had been trapped in the safe room. The ghost who held off 200 Taliban fighters at the Kabul embassy for 14 hours while evacuation helicopters extracted diplomatic personnel. "Ghost," said another, who led the rescue of that CIA team trapped behind enemy lines in Somalia. "The operator who's never lost a soldier under her command," added a third voice. "Never failed a mission." Maya stood motionless in the center of the corridor, surrounded by the evidence of her tactical superiority. 7 enemy combatants eliminated, 14 American lives saved, a terrorist attack thwarted through individual action that most special operations teams wouldn't attempt. But her expression showed no pride, no satisfaction, no triumph. She looked tired, tired in the way that came from carrying burdens nobody else could see. Colonel Webb stood at the bottom of the stairwell, his face cycling through emotions like a man watching his entire worldview collapse and rebuild itself in real time. The woman he had dismissed as a foreign contractor, the person he had spoken to with condescending impatience, the individual he had assumed was barely competent enough to mop floors. She was one of the most decorated special operations commanders in the United States military. And she had just single-handedly saved every life in the building, including his own. "Ma'am," Webb said, his voice barely above a whisper. We... Maya turned to look at him, and Webb found himself staring into the eyes of someone who had seen things he couldn't imagine, done things he wouldn't read about in any declassified reports, and survived challenges that would have broken lesser people. "You what, Colonel?" Maya asked quietly. Her voice carried no anger, no vindictiveness, just a calm certainty that was somehow more devastating than any accusation could have been. Webb's mouth worked silently. Around him, the other officers who had witnessed his treatment of Maya over the past 3 months were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Major Santos, who had laughed at her broken English, stared at the floor as if it might open up and swallow him. Captain Hayes, who had said nothing while Webb dismissed Maya from the corridor, looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. "I mocked you," Webb finally managed to say. "I treated you like someone whose life had less value than yours," Maya finished for him. "Like someone whose intelligence and experience meant nothing because of how I looked and how I spoke." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Webb's face flushed red, then went pale as the full weight of his behavior settled on him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I had no idea. If you had known my rank, you would have treated me with respect," Maya interrupted. "But what about the actual cleaning staff? What about the contractors, the maintenance workers, the people who keep this base running while you plan your operations?" Webb's silence was answer enough. Maya stepped closer to him, close enough that everyone in the corridor could hear her words clearly. "Do they deserve less respect because they don't have college degrees or security clearances? Do their lives matter less because they weren't born speaking perfect English?" Bepro tried to meet her eyes and failed. "No, ma'am, they don't." "Then why?" Maya asked with devastating quiet. "Did you think it was acceptable to treat me that way?" The question hung unanswered in the red-lit corridor. Webb opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, but no justification came out. Because there was no justification. There never had been. Staff Sergeant Clark, who had been watching the exchange with growing respect for Maya and growing disappointment in his commanding officer, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said formally, "speaking for the enlisted personnel in this building, we apologize for our failure to recognize your service and treat you with the respect you deserved." Maya turned to him, her expression softening slightly. "You weren't part of the problem, Staff Sergeant. You watched, you questioned, you treated me like a human being even when you didn't know who I was." Clark's face showed relief mixed with continued shame. "Ma'am, I should have done more." "You did enough," Maya replied. "You saw a person instead of a stereotype. That matters." She looked around the corridor, taking in the faces of everyone present, intelligence analysts who had worked in the same building with her for months without ever really seeing her, security personnel who had nodded politely while internally dismissing her as irrelevant, officers who had made decisions about her worth based on assumptions they'd never questioned. "I spent 3 months in this building," Maya said, her voice carrying to every person present. 3 months investigating a security breach that cost 11 of my soldiers their lives. 3 months listening to conversations, observing behaviors, tracking financial irregularities. Webb's face went completely white. "Ma'am, what did you find?" Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a tablet. Not the kind civilian contractors would have access to, but a military-grade device with classified connectivity. She activated it with a biometric scan and displayed a series of documents that made several officers take sharp breaths. "Bank records," Maya announced, showing payments to overseas accounts, communication logs showing contact with Syrian intelligence services, financial transactions that coincide exactly with classified briefings about Delta Force Team 9's operational timeline. The corridor fell silent except for the electronic hum of building systems and the distant sound of base security teams clearing the upper levels. Maya's eyes fixed on Webb. "The investigation is complete, Colonel. The traitor has been identified." Webb's face had gone from pale to gray. "Ma'am, I can explain." "You can confess," Maya corrected. "The evidence is overwhelming. The timeline matches perfectly. The financial transactions, the access logs, the communication records, they all point to one person." Webb's shoulders sagged as if the weight of his guilt had become too heavy to carry. Around him, the other officers were beginning to understand that they weren't just witnesses to a terrorist attack that had been thwarted. They were witnesses to the conclusion of a months-long investigation that had identified the person responsible for 11 deaths. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Webb said, his voice barely audible. "They said it was just going to be surveillance data. They said no one would get hurt." Maya's expression didn't change, but something cold and final settled in her eyes. 11 soldiers died because you sold their location to enemy forces. 11 families buried their sons, fathers, brothers, because you needed money to cover your gambling debts. "I never meant," Webb started. "Meaning doesn't matter," Maya cut him off. "Results matter, consequences matter, and the consequence of your choice is that 11 of the finest soldiers I ever served with are dead." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the building's mechanical systems seemed to have quieted, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, Webb straightened to attention. His hand came up in a salute that trembled at first, then steadied into a position of respect that was 3 months too late and would never be enough. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with shame and recognition, "I am profoundly sorry for my disrespect, and I am profoundly sorry for my betrayal of the soldiers who died because of my actions." Maya returned the salute with the crisp precision of someone who had never forgotten what honor meant, even when surrounded by people who had lost sight of it. "Your apology is noted, Colonel," she said formally, "but it doesn't bring back my team." As Webb lowered his salute, Maya could see base security personnel moving toward him with restraints. His military career was over. His freedom was over. His life as he had known it was over. And Maya Chen, the woman he had dismissed as a foreign contractor barely competent enough to clean floors, would be the one to testify at his court-martial about the systematic betrayal that had cost 11 American lives. Justice, Maya thought, didn't always come quickly. But it came. The main conference room of Fort Bragg Special Operations Command had been transformed. Where 3 months ago Maya Chen had been dismissed as irrelevant, now she stood at the head of the table in her full dress uniform, the subdued colors of her ribbons and decorations telling a story of service that most people would never fully understand. Colonel Webb was gone, arrested, charged, and awaiting court-martial for treason and the deaths of 11 Delta Force operators. In his place sat a new commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose first act had been to personally review and apologize for every security failure that had allowed Maya's investigation to be necessary. But the real change in the room wasn't about personnel or procedures, it was about perspective. Maya looked out at the assembled officers, senior non-commissioned officers, and civilian contractors who kept Fort Bragg running. For the first time since she'd begun her undercover investigation, she saw them really looking at her, not through her, not around her, but at her. seeing her as a person whose service and sacrifice had earned their respect. The investigation into Delta Force Team 9's compromise is officially closed, Maya announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never needed rank insignia to command respect. The security vulnerabilities that enabled the breach have been identified and corrected. The responsible party has been apprehended. Staff Sergeant Clark, who now served as the building's senior security coordinator, nodded from his position near the door. Over the past month, he had implemented new protocols based on Maya's recommendations, protocols that treated every person in the building as potentially valuable rather than potentially suspicious. "Ma'am," Clark said formally, "what's the status of the personnel who were targeted in the follow-up attack?" Maya's expression remained professional, but those who knew her could see the weight she still carried. "All 14 intelligence personnel who were trapped in the safe room have returned to full duty. The 3 base personnel who were wounded during the perimeter assault have made full recoveries." Captain Hayes, who had received a formal reprimand for failing to question discriminatory treatment she had witnessed, raised her hand. "Ma'am, what about the investigation into how the attackers obtained detailed intelligence about base security procedures?" "Ongoing," Maya replied, "but preliminary findings suggest the information came from the same source as the Syrian intelligence leak. Colonel Webb's cooperation with the investigation has been comprehensive." The understatement drew grim nods from around the table. Webb's confession had revealed a network of compromised personnel that reached beyond Fort Bragg, beyond Special Operations Command, and into other sensitive military installations. His arrest had been the beginning, not the end, of a much larger counterintelligence operation. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been the first to salute Maya in that red-lit corridor, spoke from his position at the senior enlisted table. "Ma'am, what's next for Ghost?" Maya paused at the question, and for a moment the professional facade slipped just enough to show the human being underneath. "Ghost is returning to operational status," she said. "There are other missions, other teams that need leadership." She didn't mention that those missions would take her back to the kinds of places where her team had died, or that every operation would carry the weight of the 11 soldiers she hadn't been able to save. Some burdens were too heavy to share, even with people who respected the person carrying them. "But before I redeploy," Maya continued, "I want to address something that extends beyond this investigation, beyond this building, beyond any single incident." She looked around the room, meeting eyes, making connections with people who had dismissed her just weeks ago. "For 3 months, I moved through this building invisibly. Not because I was trying to be invisible, but because you made me invisible. You saw a woman who looked different, spoke differently, and held a position you considered unimportant. So you stopped seeing her as a person whose thoughts, observations, and experiences might have value." The discomfort in the room was palpable, but no one looked away. "That invisibility wasn't just morally wrong," Maya said. "It was operationally dangerous. While you were ignoring me, I was gathering intelligence that none of you noticed. I was identifying security vulnerabilities that none of you caught. I was tracking behavioral patterns that none of you recognized." She stepped closer to the table, her presence commanding attention that didn't depend on volume or aggression. "What if I had been an actual enemy agent? What if the person you dismissed as harmless had been gathering intelligence to use against you? What if your assumptions about who deserves attention and who can be ignored had gotten you all killed?" The questions hung in the air like an indictment of every lazy assumption, every casual prejudice, every moment when someone had decided that appearance was more important than substance. Major Santos, who had been transferred from his previous position as part of the security review, raised his hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, what do you recommend we do differently?" Maya's expression softened slightly. Santos had requested the meeting personally, had written formal letters of apology to every civilian contractor in the building, and had volunteered for additional training on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. His question seemed genuine rather than defensive. "See people," Maya said simply. "All people. The janitor who notices that someone's been going through trash in classified areas, the maintenance worker who observes unusual after-hours activity, the contractor who speaks with an accent but understands more than you think." She gestured toward the door, beyond which the daily business of military operations continued. Every person in this building, regardless of rank, regardless of citizenship, regardless of accent or appearance, has eyes, ears, and a brain. They see things you might miss. They know things you might not consider. They have perspectives that could save your life or the lives of the soldiers you're responsible for. Clark nodded slowly. Ma'am, we've implemented new protocols for incorporating observations from all personnel levels into our security assessments. Good, Maya replied. But protocols are just paper, unless they're supported by a culture that values every person's contribution. You can't train away bias by attending a briefing. You change it by practicing. Respect until it becomes automatic. She looked around the table one more time, measuring faces, gauging sincerity, calculating whether the lessons of the past 3 months would endure beyond her presence. The soldiers who died in Syria were the best people I ever worked with, Maya said, her voice carrying the weight of loss that would never fully heal. They died because someone in a position of trust made assumptions about what was important and what was expendable. Don't let their deaths be meaningless by repeating those same assumptions. As Maya concluded her remarks, the assembled personnel rose to their feet, not because protocol required it, but because respect demanded it. They stood in recognition of service that transcended rank, sacrifice that transcended nationality, and competence that transcended every assumption they had made about who deserved their attention. Colonel Mitchell approached the head of the table, carrying a small wooden box. Colonel Chen, she said formally, on behalf of United States Army Special Operations Command, I want to present you with the Defense Distinguished Service Medal for exceptional leadership during the investigation that identified a critical security breach and prevented the loss of classified materials and personnel. Maya accepted the medal with the quiet dignity of someone who had earned recognition the hard way, through blood, sacrifice, and the kind of invisible service that rarely received public acknowledgement. But as she held the small box, her thoughts weren't on personal recognition. They were on 11 names that would never appear on any public honor roll, 11 soldiers whose families would never know exactly how or why their loved ones had died. Thank you, Maya said simply, but the real heroes are the ones who didn't come home. As the ceremony concluded and people began filing out of the conference room, Maya remained at the head of the table, looking through the window at Fort Bragg's training grounds, where new soldiers were learning to become the kind of operators her team had been. Staff Sergeant Clark approached her, his expression carrying the weight of everything they had been through together. Ma'am, he said quietly, for what it's worth, I'm glad you were here. I'm glad you were watching. And I'm sorry it took a crisis for people to see what should have been obvious from the beginning. Maya turned to look at him, this man who had treated her with basic human decency, even when he didn't know who she was. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That means more than you know. As Clark left the room, Maya stood alone with her thoughts and the weight of memories that would never leave her. In a few days, she would return to the shadows, to operations that didn't officially exist, to the kind of work that required her to become invisible again. But this time, the invisibility would be by choice, not by assumption, and somewhere in classified files that would never see daylight, the lessons of Fort Bragg would be recorded as a reminder that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones you don't see coming, and the most valuable allies are sometimes the ones you almost miss. Maya Chen had learned to be a ghost by necessity. Now she'd taught others that ghosts could be allies or enemies, and the difference might depend on whether you bothered to notice them at all. The afternoon sun streamed through the conference room windows, casting long shadows across an empty table where important decisions had been made and important lessons had been learned. Outside, Fort Bragg continued its mission of training America's finest soldiers. Inside, the memory of a woman who had been dismissed as insignificant and revealed herself to be indispensable would serve as a permanent reminder that respect, like vigilance, could never be taken for granted. True strength, Maya had proven, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it cleaned floors and emptied trash cans while gathering the intelligence that would save lives and catch traitors. Sometimes it spoke softly with an accent that made people assume weakness, while planning operations that required more courage than most people possessed. Sometimes it wore a janitor's uniform while commanding respect that no rank insignia could ever fully capture. And sometimes it was invisible until the moment when invisibility became the most powerful weapon of all. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.